cigarette smoking in my room. Yeah, I still want Marley. Blessfm radio, play good tune.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Blessradio. It's Tuesday night after 6 p.m. It's 6:15 actually. This is Brother Sard, and this is the spiritual discussion program. Just want to check if my colleagues are there with me tonight. Brother Gregory, are you there?
Hello.
Welcome to the show. We've had a bit of a late start. We had some guests in the previous show. I want to thank Lady Pearls for her show, Pearls of Wisdom, for the previous show. So welcome, Brother Gregory. How are you doing? Where are you? And how's the weather where you are?
Well, it's a bit overcast here in Brussels, capital of Europe. But it's been cool.
It's been cold. Okay.
Cool.
Okay, cool. All right. I'm going to go to Brother Femi now. Brother Femi, please tell us where you are, how's the weather, and so on.
Hello, yes. Good evening. I hope you can hear me loud and clear.
Yes.
Yes, I'm calling in from near Gatwick Airport in London. It's been a lovely day. Not too hot, not too cold, and quite bright and sunny.
Very good. And Brother Rainer, please tell us where you are and how's the weather where you are as well.
I'm in Münster, and the weather is really not worth talking about. It's overcast, it's not raining, but it feels like raining.
Okay.
And not too nice, really. Oh, well, it's summer, and
yes,
that's fine.
Okay. And Brother William, please tell us how you're doing, how's the weather, and where you are.
Yes, I'm very well. It does seem like we have a similar weather across Europe. So it's fine. The weather, like I'd use Brother Gregory's term, and say that it is cool and with overcast and all, but it's fine. And yeah, it's looking forward to the show.
Okay, and you're in Plymouth, right? Just to check that.
I am tuning in from Plymouth.
Very good. And this is Brother Saad. I'm in the studio in London, and it's really quite lovely, bright, a few clouds there, and actually warm. Or even I can say a bit hot. So yes, welcome to the show, listeners. This is the spiritual discussion program. The aim of the show is to introduce you to the Grail message in the light of truth by Abdushin, which is a spiritual knowledge of life. And as you know, we always have a topic for discussion. And this time we're going to carry on the topic from last week. Last week's topic was death and the beyond. And I'm going to title it more about death and the beyond. So there's a slightly different title to last week. So when you want to listen on YouTube, you can listen to us on YouTube, which is go to youtube.com and then search for Blessradio 1, and we are broadcasting live there. So it should be just Blessradio 1, and you should see us there. And after the show, you can listen to the recording, and it should be titled Brother Saad or Bro Saad and the Grail message, and the topic will be death and the beyond, or more about death and the beyond. You can also listen to us on the website, the Blessradio website, which is www.blessradio.org. And also you can listen to another website, which is tunein.com, and if you search for Blessfm on that. And as always, we'd love you to join us with any questions or comments. The number to contact us here in UK, it is 079 444 31366. You can call, text, or use WhatsApp. So I'll say the number again for UK, 079 444 31366. And if you're going to contact us from outside of UK, you need to add this bit. I'm going to say the full number, 0044 79 444 31366. So as I mentioned, the aim of the show is to introduce you to the Grail message. What is the Grail message? The Grail message in the light of truth by Abdushin is a spiritual knowledge of life. It offers an explanation of the world, a picture of creation on the basis of natural laws, Its lectures contain valuable basic elements as a help in life, for through the knowledge mediated, the reader is again brought closer to life and led back to God. The Grail message deals with important fundamental questions of life by explaining in a clear and logical way the automatic working of the laws of nature, the whole weaving of creation, allowing every process to be recognized, and thereby the purpose of our whole life. It is directed at the individual and speaks to the innate experiences of the human being, their strengths and weaknesses. Thus, every reader has the opportunity to discover through the intuitive perception if what is stated is the truth. Combining with matter-of-fact reasoning, a complete world picture arises, where there is no separation between the visible world and the great world beyond the five senses, nor any separation between scientific and religious striving for knowledge. I'd like to give you a couple of quotes from the author of the Grail message, Abd-Rushin. The hearer and reader of my lectures should always work within himself, keenly probing and building bridges from one lecture to the other, as well as out into the great and small world happenings. Only then will he be able to understand the Grail message and find that it gradually shapes itself into one complete whole, without leaving any gaps. Again and again, in all the happenings, the reader will come back to the basic features. He can explain everything without having to change even one single sentence. The word of the Grail message lives, so that it permits only those people who really carry the honest desire in their souls to find abundantly. All else is automatically rejected by it. For the arrogant and those who seek superficially, the message will remain the book with 7 seals. And I'd like to give you another quote from Abd-Rushin, the author of the Grail message. I wish to fill the gaps which have so far always remained unanswered in the souls of men, and which never leave any serious thinker in peace if he earnestly seeks for the truth. So dear listeners, as I mentioned, the topic for tonight is more about death and the beyond. It's continuing the topic from last week about death and the beyond, and we look forward to hearing from you. And so I want to remind you about the phone number to contact us here. In UK it is 079 444 313 66. You can call, text or use WhatsApp. If you're outside of UK, it is 0044 79 444 313 66. Now, of course, everybody's familiar with death because we know it's a fact that happens to everyone. And what I want to do is really, last week we ended the show with some questions which we couldn't really explore thoroughly because at that point we were not expecting to continue the show today. So I would like to go back to those questions, and I'm just going to offer it out to whoever would like to sort of answer it and expand on it. So last week there was one question. Yes, I'm going to start with this one. Yes, we said about suicide. So I'm going to expand the question. So what is suicide? I would like to ask that question, and then after that I have a follow-up question. So who would like to start that question today? I just want to offer that to people.
Sard, I've prepared something about suicide, so
okay. Yes,
go ahead with the question.
So yes, what is suicide? I've got a follow-up question on that, but please tell us, Brother Rainer, what is suicide and what happens with suicide?
Okay.
And maybe you can give some scenarios, because obviously...
Yeah, I will give some. I looked at a few cases with suicide.
Yes.
Okay, everyone, suicide is the most common cause of death in Germany. There are more people committing suicide than traffic accident deaths. which is quite surprising. I didn't know that. And so it's really a pertinent question. The question is really, can we solve something through suicide? Can we get out of a situation by suicide? In that book which I read, I'm just quoting something from Immanuel Kant, which is a very famous philosopher, which was incredibly influential in European culture and still is. And he wrote many things about suicide, but a few things I just want to quote here, because they line up very well with what is said in the Grail message about suicide. And so let me say what he said here. As soon as we examine suicide from the standpoint of religion, we immediately see it in its true light. We have been placed in this world under certain conditions and for specific purposes. But a suicide opposes the purpose of his creator. He arrives in the other world as one who has deserted his post. He must be looked upon as a rebel against God. God is our owner, we are his property. His providence works for our good. Well, I will put that a little bit more into how we look at it from the Grail message. I mean, fundamentally, in my opinion, everything is correct what he's saying. As soon as we examine suicide from the standpoint of religion, we immediately see it in its true light. I like this expression, in its true light, and it reminds us of the title, In the Light of Truth. We have been placed in this world under certain conditions and for specific purposes. Now, from the Grail message, under certain conditions, that is, we are placed in this world and we have to accept certain conditions. During the programs we have had, it has become very apparent that these conditions are being created or being built by the laws of creation. We want something, we think something, we speak, or we have intuitive perceptions, and all of those things start creating conditions for us, situations. And these conditions, which we are born into, they are of course for very specific purposes. The purpose being, we must learn from the experiences we are placed into it. So we are placed into conditions by what we have done in the past. The laws of creation, especially the law of reciprocal action, creates those situations, creates those conditions. We are being born for that specific purpose, that we learn how to deal with it. And the person committing suicide is the one who tries to escape from those conditions. He does not, in effect, we can say he does not want to learn his lesson. And as Immanuel Kant says, he opposes, in fact, the purpose of his creator. Of course, the creator is not personally involved, that all works through the laws of creation. He arrives in the other world as one who has deserted his post, which is quite true. He must be looked upon as a rebel against God. So that was one of the Immanuel Kant, and probably you know his name, one of the most influential philosophers and shaper of Western thought. Now, what happens if you commit suicide? I looked a few suicides up, and there's one in the Grail message being described, which I'm not using here, which is of a young woman committing suicide, and she finds herself immediately after the suicide. She tried to commit suicide by drowning, and in the actual life she threw her baby into the floods, but she wakes up in a place in the beyond, where she drowns continuously. She's kind of in a loop. She drowns. This act is being repeated and goes on, and she drowns again and again and has to go through all the suffering of drowning. And with doing that perhaps over decades, perhaps even longer, and it describes in the Grail message very well the situation around it, where there are similar people all trying to pull her under the water, and there's, of course, there are not a lot of foul language around. There's not something uplifting in those surroundings, and only after some time a feeling of motherly love for the child awakens in the woman, and she tries to at least save the child from drowning by holding it up over her head. And this wish becomes stronger and stronger, and she begins to learn the lesson that she has she begins to learn to love that child and tries to protect it from that terrible fate she has inflicted on that. Now it describes in very detail where those planes are, and I just say here in the beyond, because I don't want to go at the moment deeper into it and more precisely into it, but Abtrushin, the author of the work In the Light of Truth, of course, goes very, at this point, he tells very precisely how these planes come into existence. For example, those planes where all these suicidal people have to go through their experiences. And especially all the suicidal people, that's of course separated by the ones who throw themselves in front of a lorry, or people who choose that one by drowning. Now, this thing of being a loop immediately after the suicide, I found that, interestingly enough, quite a lot. And I found it even in Reflections on Life After Death, which is that book by Raymond Moody. I just quote him what he's saying there. I had encountered very few significant cases of near-death experiences from suicide attempts. That was when he wrote his first book. Since that time, however, I've come across some additional cases. So just some, not too many. All of these people agree on one point. They felt their suicidal attempts solved nothing. They found that they were involved in exactly the same problems from which they had been trying to extricate themselves by suicide. And of course, we know that in creation you cannot extricate himself. Everyone who knows the Grail message a little bit knows that we cannot fight the laws of creation, that there is no loophole for us. What we have to learn, and we are placed in that situation again and again. So he's quite right in his, the people who, they found that they were involved in exactly the same problems from which they had been trying to extricate themselves by suicide. And now he comes to a person. One person mentioned being trapped in the situation which had provoked her suicide attempt. She had the feeling that the state of affairs in which she had been before her death was being repeated again and again, as if in a cycle. I'm not reading that, but I'm reading, because that's very short what that person said, and but it's this being in a loop, going through that death again and again. What I'm reading now is to you from the book Many Lifetimes, which is by Joan Grant and the psychologist Dennis Kelsey. And Joan Grant is a famous author, wrote very famous author in the 20s and 30s and 40s, and I think even in the 50s. No, I think more, sorry, I'm not quite mistaken, 40s, 50s around, she had at her, and the 60s, she had this big success, and she could be clairvoyant, and she writes mainly about past lives. All her 6 novels are about her past lives, which are fascinating reading. But here I just quote something which is autobiographical, and they are on their way to Austria from England, and there are two couples, Joan Grant with her husband, and they are going to Austria, as I said, and they make a stop in Brussels, and they want to drive down the Rhine to see all the castles. So, and the place they are going to stay is the Palace Hotel in Brussels. So I'm reading now. We arrived at the Palace Hotel for a late dinner. The hotel was crowded, so we had no choice of accommodation, and we were allotted rooms on the 5th floor overlooking the courtyard. So the rooms went to the back and they were high up the 5th floor. I took an illogical dislike to our room and tried to make Leslie, that's her husband, find us another one. He reasonably refused. I'm not going into this because there was no other room in the hotel and they are going anyway just to spend one night. So they had dinner. After dinner, the other three went off to a nightclub, but I was tired and decided to go to bed. I had a long hot bath, but instead of feeling relaxed, I was becoming increasingly tense. In bed I tried to read, but after about half an hour, finding I was unable to concentrate, I switched off the light. I was still very wide awake, when suddenly a young man rushed out of the bathroom, and before I had time either to move or speak, he flung himself out of the window. I dived under the bedclothes, so that I should not hear the dreadful thud of his body hitting the pavestones. But I heard nothing, no agonized groans, no shrieks from the kitchen. She got up now and she says, clutching the handrail, I peered down, but there was no corpse there. And where the corpse should have been, a waiter was carrying a crate of bottles. This was the first time I had found myself alone in a room which was being haunted by a suicide. I prayed until the sweat ran down my forehead, and then got back in bed and tried to sleep. But I still had my eyes open when the same dreadful sequence was repeated. I could feel his panic soaking into me like ink into blotting paper. As he leaned over the balustrade, he suddenly tried to regain his balance, but it was too late. He tried to thrust out his arms to break his fall. He seemed to fall so slowly, then he realized he would be terribly injured and tried to pull back his arms so as to land on his head. He felt no pain, only a grinding thud. And then he was back in the bathroom and running towards the window again, over and over again, over and over again. So this man is just rushing out of the bathroom. She sees him flinging himself over the balcony, over that balustrade, and it goes on and on. So, how shall we interpret this? So I found in the Grail message that suicide is always a repetition too. And what I wanted just to add, talking to the hotel owner the next morning, they found out by chance that in this room there was a suicide. A suicide was committed by someone flinging himself out of the window, and that was 5 days ago. So that person is just in that loop, doing it again and again, exactly like the other case in the Grail message, and exactly like the other cases also, which are quoted in this other book, which I didn't mention because that case covers all. They are very similar all the time. So you are there in a loop and you cannot get out. The interesting thing about this case here is that he's actually still in that hotel. So he's, apart from having committed that suicide, which what forced him to relive that sequence again and again till he learns whatever he has to learn. We do not know the circumstances, so we cannot say what he's going to learn, but we can see how awful that is, a suicide, for the persons involved. So obviously he has to learn something, and why we did it, we do not know. But Abdursheen writes, I just wondered about why is he not in some other plane. By plane I mean fine gross matter. We are here in the world of gross matter, and all those things are going, they are not going in. We must now make a distinction between, divide the beyond a little bit up, between fine matter or ethereal matter, which is completely different from gross matter. We are here in the world of gross matter, of gross matter, but there's also fine gross matter, and those things we are talking about here, they occur in fine gross matter, and you can only enter into that ethereal world if you have nothing left of any fine gross matter or gross matter on you. So it's a kind of purgatory. I do not want to go too much into it, but in this context I think we have to divide it up a little bit and look closer at this. So when I die myself, I'm not immediately into the ethereal world, and by far I'm not in paradise. So that is so far above and beyond anything. That's far. So we are very close to the earth. So, and here this person is incredibly close because he's even physically in the gross material, still in that hotel.
Brother Ryan,
of course, he's.
Brother Ryan,
yeah, it's all right.
Can I refer to that like a appearance as a ghost? Because that's like the people are more familiar with that word. So, because obviously. We know that person committed suicide and the body has been taken away, so the physical body is definitely not there. And the lady who saw was it Joan Grant? She herself saw this let's say vision. She herself saw that. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So she's writing her own what she saw, and so but she thought, of course, it was a physical person, a living person on the earth jumping off out of the window. And then, of course, when she looked out of the window, she didn't see the body anymore. And then, obviously, and just to be understanding, was she already familiar with such, let's say, I'm going to use the word ghost to make it simple. Was she familiar already about ghosts? So, in a way,
oh yes,
so
she was familiar, and she knew exactly what was going on.
So she could see that what she was seeing was what it was.
Yeah, and she knows, she writes later on also, she knew she saw that not with her physical eyes,
yes,
but with some other eyes of a finer cloak in her.
Right.
So yes, people would call that a ghost and would say the room is haunted, and she felt that when they went in the room, she felt this chilliness and this irrational dislike, as I said. She was aware. So when we say ghost, of course, we should now, in that program, come to the understanding that this is an actual person, and that person is as real, is completely real. It's the self. It's when we die, we leave our physical body behind, and but we have another body, and that other body, I say, feels exactly like it. Our inner life is much more vivid and pronounced and lively because we experience much more intense, because that intellect is fallen away, which is in that closest gross material body. So that, but that ghost is a human being, completely alive. I want almost to say with flesh and blood, but he has a body. Unfortunately, people call that a ghost, but this is of ignorance. It's a person which feels everything He's jumping down and feels everything. He feels that thud, the whole procedure.
Can we call it a soul? Can we call that a soul if you're not going to call it a ghost? Should we call that a soul, or because there's also the word astral body and all these, there's some other words we could maybe use, and just to get a picture so that basically,
I think, Sard, I mean, the difficulty we are having is we can become very precise, and in the technical term, how Abdushin uses, of course, a soul is a little bit different thing. It's a soul with just another cloak.
Right.
And, but that cloak is not our, we have quite a number of cloaks, but it's not as dense as the gross material, which you have and I have at the moment. We have a gross material cloak. He's got also a gross material cloak, but a fine matter gross material cloak, so to speak. It's very close to the earth. He has not left really that plane, and I think I leave it with that, because that's very good. It shows those two things. If you commit this act, you are not extricating yourself from an awful situation. That's no way, and you are practically forced almost immediately into this loop of reliving those events where you tried to kill yourself, or if you are successful, where you killed yourself. And this can take a long time. So showed that it has this devastating reciprocal action, this devastating effect, this act of yours, it is really something to avoid and you force yourself immediately into such a situation, such a loop. So I think I stop here and I let the others perhaps discuss it, because as I said already a lot, and I've got still some other things.
Yes.
But
thank you.
Can I hand it back to you, Saad?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Brother Rainer. I've just received a question from a listener, and maybe this is the consequences of using certain words which are, let's say, too casual. So I'm just going to read the question out, and again I'm going to pass it to whoever wishes to answer the question. So the term ghost is scary. Why are you so comfortable with it? And I've just received a second question, but I'm going to just ask my colleagues, any of you, would you like to answer that? The term ghost is scary. Why are you so comfortable with it? So anybody would like to answer that one?
Well, okay.
Okay, Brother Rainer, maybe you go for it.
Yeah. The term ghost, of course, is based on a lot of ignorance. And once you concern yourself with those things and you know what's actually going on, and you become acquainted with the Grail message, you start feeling more at home, and you can also feel, you can start feeling more at home with death and see it as something natural, and your whole attitude towards death will change, and you won't perceive it as something scary, something one avoids speaking about, because it's a natural thing, and so it should be. We should not be afraid of death. And when we die, of course, we are completely ourselves. Not one little grain of our consciousness of ourselves gets lost. We just leave our body behind. When you every week you cut your nails and go to and cut your hair, and even after cutting your hair you realize I'm not less, I'm just the same person, although I've lost some hair and I lost some of my fingernails, and even if they remove an organ, you are pretty much the same person. You don't feel much different. Of course you are handicapped because you don't have a certain limb, so you are not your body, and you are then also once once you have become familiar with that thought, you're also not afraid of doing that step to leave that body behind and step into the beyond, which is dying. And step in the beyond, of course, a new world opens. Later on, I think I will read another thing which is more beautiful. And the beyond is fascinating, and it's our way back towards the luminous heights, which we should have, on which we should proceed. And so, what I wanted to say, it's not something scary, and if that death occurs naturally, of course it's a progress. We go, or it should be a progress. It should be one, we have done our earth life, and we have learned the lessons we should learn here on earth, and now in the beyond, in that plane where all our threads lead us to, because we have to tread on those paths which we prepared for ourselves, and so we are led somewhere else into the beyond, and we experience, and we have to learn our lesson there, and then it goes on, and hopefully it goes upwards and upwards and upwards towards those incredible far away land, which I call the luminous heights, which are also called paradise. That far away, this blue island far above the world of matter, where we are finally safe, and which is our home. Yes. Of course, that blue island, very high above that world of matter, which is some kind of paradise. Of course, that's not the end of the story. That's still far, far away from God. So we have already talked several times about the topography, about the beyond, which is just one word, and it lumps everything together. It's almost ridiculous. And but it's in an extent, it is so big compared with what we have here on Earth, or what even with that universe is a small grain of sand compared with what we call beyond. So it's very vast, but right now I think we should just keep to that phrase, the world of matter, and we mentioned ethereal matter, and we mentioned the gross material. And when we go into the beyond, of course, we are here in the gross material, we go in some finer form of the gross material. And so we are very close to those planes. We are not yet even in the ethereal world, which is of a completely different kind. I mean, if you read the Grail message, it explains those things. The ethereal matter is of a different kind altogether, and the forces there can never be picked up by any gross material instrument, however fine it is. Only the human being can do it. In fact, I quote the human being is really made to link all those different worlds together. I quote here Aptoshin, which I just wrote down. Man did not, as was essential, serve as a connecting link between the fine and the gross material parts of creation. Did not let the ever-refreshing, animating, and furthering necessary alternating current flow through, but separated creation into two worlds by evading his obligation and chaining himself wholly to gross matter. I'll read that again, because it says, in other words, we are the link between the ethereal world, what is called the fine matter world here, and the gross matter world, because we have both in us. And because we concentrated and chained ourselves wholly to gross matter through the intellect, we did not provide that link which we should have, which is our task in creation, to provide that link that the energy can flow from the fine matter or the ethereal matter into the gross material, and there's a flow back of energy and a flow down from the fine matter world. Now, I hope I'm not too confusing. It is very difficult with all those, for someone who is not acquainted with those terms, to keep them apart. And so, but please phone in, or if there are too many difficulties. I hope I'm not confusing you. So, but we are the link, and should link those two worlds, the gross material and the ethereal world, the fine material, I call it. And because we have both parts of us, and no machine will ever be able to tap the energies in the gross material, in the ethereal world. So it's simply impossible to tap those energy flows through a machine. Machines can only tap energies in the gross material, and we must be quite even that step from the gross material to the fine gross material, where those people go which are dead. That's an incredible large step. That fine gross material is completely different. With all our huge detectors, we cannot we cannot detect anything of that world. We cannot see a ghost coming, or we cannot see a ghost there, or no one with any kind of machinery could not detect this person committing suicide, doing that suicide attempt in the room. Only the human being, through his inner sensory organs, so because he has got a part of the spiritual and a part of the ethereal in himself, can detect the atmosphere and can detect. How did she try it? I took an illogical dislike to our room. We take an illogical dislike, but this is not. No machine can detect something. No machine will be able to understand why one as a person can take an illogical dislike to something and say, I want to get out, I want to change the room, like this woman did. So I pass it back.
Yes, thank you.
To you,
thank you, Brother
Sard.
Rainer. I've got
Yes, hello.
Brother William.
Thank you.
Okay.
Good evening. Can I just say something very quickly?
Yes, please do.
Thank you, Mr. Rainer. You've really been very elaborate in your description, and you've really gone to town. I just want to address and just say just a little bit more, just to add a little to what you've said when the listener asked a question about ghosts and why it's used loosely. Let's just say that if an understanding of what ghosts are needs to be. I think we just need to be very clear about what ghosts are. And then when we have that clarity, then and I think it's best to just simply look or see ghosts really as earthbound souls. And when I talk about the soul, I'm just talking about human beings like us with the non-physical cloak. So human being not having the physical body as we have it here on earth. So that this is where we are, the earth. So non-physical cloaks would be the soul. So the soul with the non-physical body, the earthly body. Now, people, the ghosts as we know them, are earthbound. And what do I mean by earthbound? These people have passed away. That is, they have shed their physical cloak. But to them, they perhaps through their perceptions or whatever, are not convinced or have not actually come to that realization that they don't have their physical body anymore. So they're usually called earthbound souls, and there are so many things that a lot of us take for granted that can actually cause us to become earthbound. And I'll give you some examples. You know, we do have different propensities, for instance. You know, people have different propensities. Some, we talk about things like using of substances, alcoholism, for instance, other substances, smoking, for instance, gambling. You know, there are a whole bunch of things that we can get ourselves very attached to, you know. And so when we pass away, because we still have that, you know, what we have a penchant for becomes more of our reality, you know. And so we find ourselves hovering around and not being able to make progress, but hovering around places where these urges, you know, can be satisfied, you know. So that's one of the things that causes people to become earthbound, you know. And then, of course, the story that has just been given or described here, again, what the loop that this person is experiencing, and this person, to this soul, it is very likely that it has not come to that realization that it has shed its physical cloak. So it's still hovering around that same spot where, you know, the suicide was committed. And I think last week we also talked about, we're trying to make that distinction between the beyond and where we are. But actually, it's very, very important to note that, you know, there's no separation between here and the beyond. It's one uniform existence. And all that it is just the being able to tune in to that frequency of the beyond, and then you can get things of that nature. But there's no separation per se. And we also talked about the fact that if we think about where we have come from, we've had to journey from way far above the spiritual realm, or the paradise of the human spirit, or what some would term as heaven, all the way down. And we've had to traverse different planes on our way down. And each plane, we have to cover ourselves in the cloak of that plane so that we're able to manifest and function there, you know. And so the earth man, as we are, we have the cloaks of all the planes that we've had to traverse, all the way down from our origin, paradise, to where we are now, earth, the earth, or the term Mr. Brodorino used, gross matter. And so when we when we pass away or experience physical death, all that has happened really is we have shed the cloak, or the outermost covering, or the cloak, or the garment, you know, the physical body. But all the other cloaks remain, and as we progress, we shed the cloaks as we journey back home, you know. So that's so when you have that knowledge, which the message explains very well, and there's a lecture on earthbound souls, or earthbound in the message, very, very clearly explained. But when you have that knowledge, you know, of creation and these processes, then you come to the realization that really there's nothing to fear, because, you know, physical death does not bring the end to one's existence. And I guess the thing about these suicide experiences, you know, and the constant loop, you know, is that it's just, again, for them to come to that recognition, because most people who commit suicide, the motive behind it is that it brings an end to their suffering. And so it's an escape route, you know. It's become overwhelming for me. I can't cope, you know, and I want to do this and just end it all, you know. But what awaits them when they commit suicide becomes a rude shock to most of them, because they realize that, wow, you know, you've done this, but life goes on, life continues. They continue, and they continue to experience the things leading to that, you know, until they come to that realization that actually it was not the solution to the problem, you know. But yeah, ghosts are simply earthbound souls. And what now happens is that sometimes, and when you talk about ghosts being scary, what now happens is that sometimes in some of the places, when you say that some of these places are haunted, what actually happens in these places is that there may be someone around there, you know, who may provide some kind of homogeneity in terms of radiation. It's a process of a radiation process, you know, that similar radiation that just enables this ghost, you know, to manifest around there. And so the ghost can just become quite naughty, if I use the term naughty, and do some spookish things because there's someone around there that just provides something, you know, for it to make itself felt or being present. That's why you hear some places they say they're haunted, but actually it may just be that there's someone there, you know, who is providing that platform. But they cannot do anything to you because they don't have the physical cloak, you see. So there's nothing scary when you we talk about knowledge being power, you know, then you realize that there's nothing to be scared about ghosts because you know what exactly is going on. You understand the process. So I'll just leave it at that because like I said, Brother Reiner has been very extensive in painting the picture that we're trying to paint about suicide and all that. So thank you.
Thank you, Brother William. I've got another question from the same listener.
Yes.
When Brother Reiner was speaking, but I'm going to again offer it to whoever wishes to answer this one. So the question, I've just lost it. 1 second, please. Here we go. Okay. I'm going to have to do it from the top of my head because I thought it was there. Brother Reiner, you were talking about when somebody commits suicide, they keep repeating their experience. They keep reliving their experience in the beyond. And the person is asking, it doesn't make sense to that person that they keep reliving their experience in the beyond after committing suicide. So I'm just 1 second. I'm going to try and actually find the actual question. Not quite sure what happened that I lost it. 1 second, please. No, I'm afraid I can't find it again. So just if you go with what I said, why the person who has committed suicide keeps reliving their experience in the beyond, because there doesn't seem to be an end from what you're saying. So again, I don't know if Brother William, you want to come in there, or
yes, let me go ahead and just answer that. I thought I probably dealt with that over my explanation. So the reason why the person is reliving the experience, first of all, life has not come to an end. You know, so the person realizes that they're actually still alive. You know, what has happened is that the physical cloak obviously has been shed, and in some cases, some of these people don't even realize that they've actually shed the physical cloak. You see, that's one of them. But secondly, what is also happening there, you know, is that reliving that experience, because one of the things about our purpose in life and our purpose of being here on earth and in material creation is to experience, you know, and through experiencing we grow and we mature, you know. And so I don't know who has said this, but let me just say that one of the books I was reading, it goes as follows. It says, learn we must, but the decision or the choice to learn either the easy way or the hard way lies with us. But we must learn. And if we don't learn, history has a way of repeating itself. So that loop, that re-experiencing, again, is to bring to the attention of that particular soul or human spirit the fact that, you know, whatever has happened or whatever has led it to that action is not the solution, you know. And so maybe out of that continued re-experiencing, then there awakens in that person a slight change or shift in volition, a shift in their perception, such that they're now coming to that realization that this was not right, and maybe some modicum of regret, and then perhaps out of humility, the person now asks for help. Then, that help may be made available, and then someone may come up and then present to that person and take that person away. And it's possible that maybe if that person who perceived this ghost, this lady who wrote, if she was she had the opportunity to actually speak to that human spirit, if she was or that human soul, to let him know that this is what it is, it may have been able to appeal to that person. But the process of recycling or the loop is just to make sure that at some point the person comes to that realization, that what they did was not the solution to the problem. And so sometimes, unfortunately, this experiencing can go on for years, decades, centuries before that person even comes to that realization. And you can see that the person has really wasted precious time, which they should have used, to continue the process of experiencing and maturing. So I think that is as how I'd want to again explain that re-experiencing. But it's basically for that person to learn, and hopefully, if the earlier the person is able to learn and grasp the message of what it's hoping to convey to him or her, the quicker that person is able to get out of that loop.
Thank you very much, Brother William. Dear listeners, you're listening to Blessradio. This is the spiritual discussion program on Tuesday night, 6 till 8. And the aim of the show is to introduce you to the spiritual knowledge in the light of truth, the Grail message by Abrushin. The topic we're discussing tonight is more about, it's a continuation from last week's topic of death and the beyond, and I'm going to call it more about death and the beyond. And I've just received some more questions from another listener, and again I'm going to offer it. Well, let me offer this one to Brother Femi. Actually, let me choose Brother Femi. So, Brother Femi, the listener is asking this question: Would you say that demons are naughty souls, and if not, what are they? That's to Brother Femi.
Okay. Thank you for the question.
And just a little bit more, the person said, do they really exist? So the question again, would you say demons are naughty souls? If not, what are they? And do they really exist?
Okay. Thank you once again for the question, like I said. I think it's quite understandable that for the normal or the average Earth man and woman, of course, it is very easy to limit our concept of what exists purely to that which we can see. We see plants, we see other human beings, we see different type of animals, and of course we know that when we use different equipment, we see other things like bacteria, various parasites, and so on and so forth. But the reality, indeed, is all that we see is purely a function of what the physical body experiences. And even then, when I say it's a function of what the physical body experiences, there is, as science has clearly demonstrated, there is only a range of frequency that the human eyes can cope with and see. It is a well-known fact that animals, different type of animals, see more than humans can, and same thing with sound as well. If our ears are not attuned to picking up certain frequencies, we do not hear them. It doesn't mean that they're not there, and it doesn't mean that others do not have the ability to hear them. So when we talk about entities, or we talk about beings in creation, the question then is, indeed, can we just say that all that we can see with our physical eyes represents all that there is to see? And the simple answer to that is definitely not. In addition to the creatures that God the Father allowed to come into existence as a result of his radiation, as a result of his own existence, and of course we know about angels, we know about archangels, for those who still believe, we know about fairies, we know about gnomes, and so on and so forth. But in addition to that, for the human beings, that is us, that are here on this earth, we have what is called a free will that allows us to create, for want of a better expression. I will use the word create or form. Form is probably a better word to use, because in reality, we're not creating anything new. All the components that is required to form is already there. So a human spirit has the ability to encapsulate a part of the natural power of his creator that permeates creation, to encapsulate it in part of our thinking process. And so if I'm focused on thinking beautiful thoughts, pleasant thoughts, uplifting thoughts, I'm actually forming something that, in quotes, has a life of its own, which others that are gifted can actually see. So if we think about the English term that says thought forms, it actually does have a form. So your thinking, like it or not, has a form, and that is why it's called thought forms. And so there is a lot more to that expression, thought forms, than what we realize. And in the same way, that which is base, those who constantly surround themselves with heavy thoughts, depressive thoughts, thoughts of doing one form of evil or negative thing to their neighbor, in the same way, they also create the form. And the amazing thing about life, I mean, we've already talked extensively about the laws of life, one of which we called the law of homogeneity. So I create a form that is beautiful. That form that I create would naturally attract other beautiful forms of a similar nature to in essence, become more powerful. And in the same way, it applies with negative forms as well. So I happen to be someone who is constantly feeding on the possibility of ending my life. I'm sending out these thoughts, which effectively creates a form, and indeed that form attracts other similar forms. And invariably, such people get to the stage where their own free will can no longer be exercised, because they're now completely dominated by their own creation. And so a lot of us on a day-to-day basis, we actually suffer from that which we have created, because it is connected to us. And so, to answer the original question, do demons exist? Most certainly they do. Demons are not the creation of God the Father. The Almighty Father does not create beings or forms that are there to torment people. Demons and phantoms are creation of humanity, of men, of ourselves. And these forms are substantially what has brought about that which we refer to as hell. So again, hell is actually not the work of the devil, as many people would like to think, and hell similarly is not the work of the creator. Hell is actually forms that we human beings have created as a result of our weakness, as a result of our laziness, as a result of our deliberate desires that are not befitting of a human spirit, and we need to live through those things. We need to experience those things. So similar to the case of the person who chose to commit suicide, who effectively creates a frozen snapshot that he or she continues to experience until one day, sooner rather than later, hopefully, the core, the spirit, recognizes that that action was actually a completely wrong action, and then they can break away from that frozen frame. In the same way, for those of us on our day-to-day living, if we allow ourselves to be heavily dominated with negativity, unfortunately, we tie ourselves to all these horrible regions, which we will refer to as hell, that potentially we may need to experience when we depart this life. And so the more we move towards creating uplifting, helpful, joyful type of forms through our thoughts, the more likely we are to actually experience those things, because we attract them very actively to ourselves, be it good or bad. Brother Sard, I hope that answers the question. I think was the question in two parts, if I remember correctly.
There's one bit I think you haven't quite dealt with, because it says, would you say demons are naughty souls? And I don't think you haven't given it a definite yes or no on that. So I just want you to. I know you. So I'll just let you answer that.
Well, demons are not souls because there are in creation, as I've said, there are so many different types of species of entities that exist. A soul, in its true sense, is a spirit, a human spirit that has taken on form and has taken on the cloaks that allows it to function in the world of matter. Okay, so that is a soul. So a demon is actually not a soul. A demon is a form that has been created as a result of human thought processes. And indeed, they can torment us. So if the torments that we're going through is what will be described as being naughty, then of course they're not beneficial to us in any way whatsoever, because they are of an evil nature, and we would most certainly want to dissociate ourselves from any such connection.
Okay, so just to come. I would say another thing on that. So demon is not a sorry, I just got to clear my head there. So demon is a thought form. Would you say it like that? Demon is a thought form, something that a human being has thought out or put out, and then it's become a form, and is something that is ugly, or somebody that has put out something evil. Because obviously, the word demon definitely doesn't sound nice. It
doesn't sound nice. Yeah. Yes. Can I just help Brother Femi just to add a little bit to what Brother Femi has said about demons? Because we just need to be as clear as possible about this concept. Now, the thing is to trace again the core of the human spirit. The core. We are spiritual beings, you see, and we have been placed in creation here. Apart from the essence or the importance of our, or the function or the purpose of our being here, being to mature. We're here to mature and develop, to that state of consciousness and self-awareness and awareness of the Creator. But we are also endowed, we're also to further creation, and we actually, if we were doing what we should be doing, we should be lords of creation. And we human spirits have been given that power or that ability, to use the principal neutral power of the Creator. So we have this neutral power that we use consciously or unconsciously. Now, we human spirits, part of our experiencing, how do we interact with the environment? How do we interact with the people that come? We use our thoughts, we intuit, so we have an intuitive perception or the intuition. Now, the intuition, very importantly, is the inner voice, that quiet inner voice. And that intuitive perception is the voice of the Spirit, which is the very essence of who we are. That is the core, the Spirit. So, and then we have our deeds or our actions. Now, the demons, actually, to be very specific, when something touches us deeply, such that we intuit about something, So when we have a deep sensing of something, we intuit about something. Let's say, for instance, envy. Envy arises deeply within us, such that it's touched our very core, our spirit. Envy arises out of it. Now, the human spirit has that ability, using the principal neutral power, that a form is created, and this is a living form. A living form is created out of this very, very dark, envious kind of intuition that we have, that is able to function now independently, and so we create a demon from this deep intuitive sensing, you see. And then you can now imagine that to whom is given a power and all that is given responsibility. Now imagine that with this deep intuitive perception that you've now created a form, a demon, that is able to function independently and even cause mischief, even when you're not still having that intuition. And so, but that demon also remains, apart from being able to function independently, remains connected with you in some ways, So the same thing, our thoughts, we also think, we also express ourselves through our thoughts. Now the thoughts also, but the thoughts now not able to use this power, access this power, but the thoughts still can be quite dangerous, because the thoughts can also create forms, which we can call phantoms, you see. So the thought forms can cause entities or forms to arise that can present as phantoms. Now, you can now see the serious responsibility that we human spirits have, because when we are positive and uplifting, for instance, and you have an uplifting intuitive perception, you can form benevolent beings that are, beings of the light, that are serving, fulfilling the will of the Almighty. But dark intuition, you create a demon, But again, everything you do is accountable by the laws of creation. So we must be very, very careful, and we must understand these things and know that, ignorance of the laws does not, absolve us of that responsibility. So it's just to add a little bit of that, just to be very specific here, that yes, and so demons are really dark entities that are created through the intuitive perception of man. The man using his intuition and the power, granted him, to create something dark. And there's a serious consequence to that, So we must always strive, to be uplifting in terms of our thoughts and our actions, because
we are still responsible before the laws of the Creator. So I'll just stop there.
Thank you, Brother William.
Can I just add just one little remark, which I think perhaps did not come across clear enough.
Go on.
It is not that we can choose to create those forms. We have to create those forms. We create them all the time if we want or do not want. So here, Brother William, he just talked about the emotion of envy arising in you and surfacing up. That immediately creates those demons. We cannot avoid this. This envy takes on form willy-nilly. It is just that law. We cannot not do it because we are spiritual. We create those forms, and this way we populate. We said always can populate. We must populate the world. We cannot avoid populating the world with demonic creatures, which, as Brother William then said, can roam around because of this, because we created them with our emotional core, with our core, our deepest level of being. They almost have a kind of, they have a life of their own and can roam around and do harm. But all the time those creatures are connected with us, and we are still tied to the results and have to, before we can ascend further, we have to make good what those creatures create. So it's an unbelievable power which we have, but we cannot avoid having the power. We create all the time. That's just what I wanted to say. And it's not only that we create demons and phantoms all the time, which can plague humanity, and because we are essentially, the majority of mankind is evil, so there are evil shapes. We create our also landscapes, villages and towns. And let me just, and these are all in fine matter also, these demons and phantoms are in fine matter. I just read something from the Grail message, because before we finish, I'd like to read something else. Yeah. So in the Grail message it says, we talked about this creating those forms, and I just extended it. We create also planes, and Abdushin writes, this plane of finer gross matter has already been seen by many people. It still belongs to the world of gross matter and is formed by the elemental beings which prepare the path of the human spirit everywhere. So we create those forms, we create those landscapes, and we have to go there. In this way, landscapes, villages and towns also arise. That which is beautiful and that which is ugly. However, the different kinds are always precisely linked together. That is, the ugly with the ugly, the beautiful with the beautiful, corresponding to the homogeneous species. These are the places, the planes, in which you must still move about after your earthly death before you can enter the fine matter world. So, we are just lumbered with that creating power which we have, and we create through every thought of us whole towns, cities, villages, demons, and whatsoever. They can be very beautiful, and so I hand it back to you. But Sard, I've prepared this other thing which I read last time, because that ties in exactly.
Okay.
About that person having that near-death experience, that woman.
Yes.
Where she exactly describes those. She has a short visit to one of those villages we create through just being a human being, and as soon as we do something, we create those forms. We are formative. Shall I read that?
I want to just because I've got two more questions from the same listener, and I really want them to be addressed. So if I go
Okay.
to those first to Brother Gregory, I'm going to ask both those questions to Brother Gregory because he hasn't had a chance to say anything so far. And then, Brother Rainer, you can be next after that to, continue the
Okay, no
what
problem.
happened. Yeah, because I think it's. And I'm going to ask Brother Gregory. Apologies if you can be as brief and as to the point as possible, so that Brother Rainer can also say what he needs to say. So now this question is from a lady called Maria. She's the one who already asked the question about the demons. Now she has another question which is to do with her own personal experience, which she says, I saw a ghost of my great-grandmother who I never met. She died 3 days before I was born. I cannot see this as real living. So what is it? What is this? So I'm just going to read it again. I saw the ghost of my great-grandmother who I never met. She died 3 days before I was born. I cannot see this as real living. So what is that? Brother Gregory, please can you answer that?
Well, thanks for that particular question. When the question arises, I saw a ghost of my great-grandmother. The question she should ask herself first is, did she see that with the physical eyes or with some other eyes? Because, of course, her great-grandmother is not more in the physical. We know that the body is gone, disintegrated in the grave. Therefore, she must be seen with some other eyes. Sometimes this seen in a dream, in which there's the gradual detachment of the soul from the physical body, and therefore it's more sensitive to the vibrations out there. So she must have perceived the presence of her great-grandmother, who would have, one way or the other, unless she's hanging around and she's not going anywhere, and there are many cases like that, made herself perceptible to the granddaughter. But she did not see grandmother with her physical eyes. It must have been with some other eyes which she herself possesses.
Yes, I mean she called her a ghost. So I'm now, and I know we've sort of established that the ghost is not somebody, is a human being without the physical body, but that is like a very simplistic word that we have used to describe it. So I think she's aware that that's not what she saw was not a physical person, but actually, let's say the soul. I'm going to say, it's difficult to say it in a very simple way, but let's call it a soul, or I just don't mind calling it a ghost actually, because we know that the ghost is not a physical being. So as long as everybody's clear that it's not a physical being, then we could still say that. So, but the next part of that question she was asking, she's saying she cannot see this. I cannot see this as reliving. So,
well, it is what many call reality is only a fraction of reality.
Right.
That means she herself will have to improve herself, her perceptions, to know that reality, is more than what they see physically. After all, there are waves out there, radio waves which they can not see, and yet through radio waves we are able to communicate. Would that one be real living? So there are many other things which the human spirit is equipped to be able to do, but because one is not used to them, he or she says that it's not real. Reality has nothing to do with the limitations of perceptions. Reality has to do with opening up oneself and being able to make use of that power which streams through creation. That is reality. So gradually but surely she opens herself and she's able to perceive that which lies beyond gross material. That is real living.
Thank you. I'm going to continue with the second question from, her name is Maria. She is saying, am I right to say recurring nightmares are reliving a certain state of mind created as a result of our thought patterns? So I'm going to repeat this question. So am I right to say recurring nightmares are reliving a certain state of mind created as a result of our thought patterns? So, yes. Can you?
Well, one will say yes and no. Yes, in the sense that when you have these nightmares and you respond to them, that response, you create a wave of energy around yourself. And if you are so much attached to them out of fear, then those fear forms are very close to you because you provided threads through which they are attracted to you. But as soon as one is bold enough to tear them apart, those nightmares will vanish. So it's a matter of will. Through homogeneity, you attract that which is which is similar to your thoughts. And if you don't allow the thoughts to go, and they're of a terrible nature, they will keep haunting you.
Thank you, Brother Gregory. Dear listeners, you're listening to Bless Radio. It's the Tuesday night spiritual discussion program. The aim of the show is to introduce you to the spiritual work in the light of truth, the Grail message by Abdushin. And if you want to get a copy of the Grail message or find out more about the Grail message, we know you can look at this website, which is www.grailmessage.com. That's www.grailmessage.com. And the topic for discussion tonight is, continuing from last week, death and the beyond. And you can join us with any questions or comments. If you're in UK, the number here is 079 444 313 66. You can call, text, or use WhatsApp. And if you're outside of UK, it is 0044 79 444 313 66. So I'm going to go
sorry, Brother Stad, may I just very quickly and very briefly?
Yes, go ahead.
That the topic for today, again, which was a carryover from last week, is death and the beyond.
Yes, death.
There are 2 lectures in the work in the light of truth, the Grail message. 2 lectures. One is death. Following that one is departed this life. So whatever is discussed, one will advise many a listener to examine those lectures if they have the inner capacity and they are bold enough to examine those lectures, and many things will become clear within them. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Gregory. And just to listeners, just so you're aware, some of the questions you have given are, let's say, I'm going to use this word complex in quotes. Not that it doesn't mean we can't handle them or we don't want to deal with them. It just, they need a lot of background information, which my fellow colleagues have been trying their best to address before they answer the question. So sometimes these answers seem to be very long, but they needed to prepare the background before they could answer these questions. So I just wanted the listeners to understand that, and that's why we keep recommending, really, they do pick up the Grail message and read in there, because there's some of these questions, as I say, you do need quite a bit of information or knowledge before you can really go and answer them. So I'm going to go back to Brother Reiner now. Brother Reiner, you wanted to say further about the experiences in the beyond. Please go ahead.
I read in the previous program, I read a piece of a near-death experience, which I want to reread because we didn't comment on it, and there's actually quite a lot in it, which is a nice illustration of what we said before and what is also in the Grail message. So it's a kind of a living proof, and it also shows that once you have the Grail message, you can deal much better with those things you are faced with. You know what they are about, and and you know what is going on. So let me just read again. That was about this. It is from Reflection on Life After Life by Dr. Raymond Moody, and it is this person having the near-death experience and seeing that city of light, which we now can know much more what it is. It started like this. There was a vibration of some sort. The vibration was surrounding me, all around my body. It was like the body vibrating. Where the vibration came from, I don't know. But when it vibrated, I became separated. I could then see my body from the outside. So this is clearly the first step of dying. Most of the people talk about that vibration or a hissing sound or something. It is really when like in a telescope, the soul slips out of the gross matter body. And she writes quite correctly, I became separated. I could then see my body. Then she could see her body from the outside, which is now, and this is actually, you are now in the beyond. That's the first thing, and you see your own body in those near-death experiences. I stayed around for a while and watched the doctor and nurses working on my body, wondering what would happen. I was at the head of the bed, looking at them and my body, and at one time one nurse reached up the wall over the bed to get the oxygen mask, and as she did so, she reached through my neck. Now this is very interesting in the light of what we have said before. We see quite clearly she is the same, she is the person there staying around, looking at her own body, the body now lying there without a soul, like a cloak, like a husk. And funnily enough, she sees even the nurse in the operating theater or in the hospital reaching for the oxygen mask, and it right goes through her, and she reaches right through her. And here we've got the different densities, although she's now on a different level, where the density of her own body is much closer, and it can walk through walls, that other body, or someone can reach through it. They just do not interfere anymore because they are of a different density, and we have, if we die, we are here in the gross material, in the most dense body, and finer things always can penetrate, less dense things can penetrate the grosser thing. And so we have radio waves which can penetrate to some extent walls, go through walls. We can have even waves, electromagnetic waves like created by in the nucleus of things, which can pass through the whole of the earth without interfering. That's exactly the same what we see here. Those two types of matter, the gross matter and that woman outside her body, they do not interact anymore with each other. They can walk through each other. So, in fact, her body now is not detectable by any instruments. Now, but the interesting thing now, she's standing there watching the people. Someone reached for oxygen mask and reached right through her, and she didn't feel anything. And after this, I floated up. I went through this dark tunnel. I went into the black tunnel and came out into brilliant light. A little bit later on, I was there with my grandparents and my father and brother who had died. There was the most beautiful, brilliant light all around. And this was a beautiful place. There were colors, bright colors, not like here on earth. but just indescribable. There were people there, happy people. People were around, some of them gathered in groups, some of them were learning. So, I get a disturbance. So, what happens now here, the important thing is, she is being lifted onto another plane in the beyond, which is a little bit higher up. And this is always similar to this. After this, I floated up, I went through this dark tunnel. It seems kind of related quite often. This transposition or drifting up is related with going through a dark tunnel, and you go into another world, you go to another plane. So that's very rare in near-death experiences. That's why he wrote that second book. There are not too many people who have experienced that, the City of Light. And I want to point out also this most beautiful, brilliant light all around. Many people describe that who come in more luminous regions. It's very agreeable to the eye. Colors, the colors have a brightness which is not here on Earth. It is just indescribable, she writes here. Not like here on Earth, but just indescribable. Off in the distance, I could see a city. There were buildings, separate buildings. They were gleaming bright. People were happy in there. There was sparkling water, fountains. The City of Light, I guess, would be the way to express it. It was wonderful. There was beautiful music. Everything was just glowing, wonderful. But if I had entered into this, I think I would never have returned. I was told that if I went there, I couldn't go back, that the decision was mine. So when she decided to go back, so what she saw there was, in fact, the path she would have to tread after she had died. If she had decided now, she would have been living in that city. And we know now from the Grail message that our thoughts, our emotions, and our actions, they create and form and shape that world of fine gross matter, and it creates also cities of light. So, and these cities we can actually recognize. They might be Venice or some other city, and everyone is doing that all the time. We are creating those landscapes, those cities of light, if we are directed more towards the light things, and we cannot avoid that. But we are also creating more hellish places, and often there's there's also a Venice of darkness, completely terrible place, and if it's dark enough, we call it hell. And Abdushin really, I reread that also, reread it again, because that's so important, and I hope it entices someone to take up that work and to become clear about these things. And someone in the last session said, oh, what is the evidence that what is there in the light of truth? What is the evidence that this is right, that there's a light of truth? There's lots of evidence. If we start seeing things in the light of truth, we see them completely different as they are now. So everyone, and one of the things is just here with this little thing which is just in a book, which I just picked out, which to most of the people remains just not understandable. But now with a little bit of knowledge of In the Light of Truth, we can really understand what is going on. And this is the wonderful book and this wonderful effect of that book, In the Light of Truth. And it really proves that there's valuable information, in fact, information we need in order to be able to overcome the fear of death. I just read about this City of Light now in the message. In this way, we create and form the planes of fine gross matter, which awaits you when you have to pass over into the ethereal world. So the planes of fine gross matters are the threshold for your soul, to use your expression, where the soul must first purify itself after earthly death. And this is exactly where this woman went. This plane of finer gross matter has already been seen by many people. Quote from the message: it still belongs to the world of gross matter and is formed by the elemental beings which prepare the path of the human spirit everywhere. That might be a little bit not understandable for the listener what is meant by the elemental beings, but we can replace it by it is formed by us, and we kind of create the path of our own soul, of our own spirit. In this way, landscapes, villages, and towns also arise. That which is beautiful and that which is ugly. And here this person, in that near-death experiences, she has seen such a town, such a city of light, just from the distance. Already in those few minutes, she had this out-of-body experience, and then she goes back. She's of course seen a tiny little thing of the beyond. And she has just seen those things, she has been shown those things where she will have to go once she dies, and she won't, once she will die in future sometime. So I leave it with that. I hope that's a good ending to the program, and really shows the benefit of the Grail message.
Thank you.
That you are not just, this is just not anymore just something the brain conjures up. You can see there's a reality behind those near-death experiences.
Yes, thank you, Brother Rainer. What I can tell you, listeners and my fellow presenters or colleagues, the next presenter is on his way, and he will be here at 8:30 in half an hour. He's running late. So I want to let the listeners for the next show. Brother Sayom is running late. He's going to be here 8:30, so his show will start. So we're going to carry on. Hopefully my colleagues are happy with that, and until Brother Sayom arrives. So is that okay with you, my colleagues? I think you're with me. So let's carry on.
Yes, that's fine. Please do so.
Thank you very much. That's really great. Now, I want to talk sort of on a different angle now to what we've been talking so far. Let's say from the more, we've been talking from the point of view so far of the individual spirit or the human being who sort of dies and passes on. But I want to talk about people who are left behind on the earth, the relatives, friends, and so on, and the impact on those people and how they react to this death of their loved one, let's say. And so I'm going to ask this to Brother William now. Brother William.
Yes. Hello.
Should one cry or grieve when one loses a loved one in death? That's to Brother William.
Yes. Just to answer that, again, like you said before, some of these questions are not particularly easy to answer without giving a bit of a background. But let me try and make it as short and brief as possible. And I'll say, because I know that matters of the heart and emotions, it can be very difficult to control. I mean, you hear someone who was very close to you. There are a lot of fond memories, a lot of experiences shared, and mutual benefits and all that. And then this person, passes away. So obviously that can really elicit very, very strong emotions. But actually, in the context of everything we've discussed today, talking about the fact that death, and we talked about last week, talking about death, physical death, is just a basic transition. We're just is born into the beyond, and death from the beyond over here, as in, is just a transition. Physical death, we we drop our physical cloak, you see. And so the spirit, the core, the soul, continues to live on, continues to experience after that. Now, the problem with showing very, very strong emotional responses when people pass away is that it has the tendency that the human spirit or the soul, who may have detached from the physical cloak, because it takes, depending on the nature of the individual concerned, some people take a slightly shorter period to detach when they pass away. Some take a longer period to detach from the physical cloak completely when they pass away. So, depending, it may well be that the human being in question, has already started to detach from this physical cloak, or has even completely detached. Now, that strong emotional response, crying and all the very things, now can elicit some kind of empathy in this soul, who ideally should be, making his way to other realms, to continue his maturity and to continue his experiencing. Now feels that urge or empathy for the people who are very, very distraught by his or her passing away, and that strong emotional response, it can be enough to reattach this already departing soul and relink it with this physical cloak. So you can now imagine that it now goes through that process of again trying to detach, which can be quite cumbersome, for these souls that should be departing. So the recommendation, and out of respect and consideration for the departed one, we are encouraged to comport ourselves, and be calm and composed, and also know that these departed ones would continue, and all it is that they're just going to somewhere else, and preferably and hopefully somewhere better, and so that at some point, your paths are likely to cross again, so the best you can do for that person departing, who is leaving, is to send them your good thoughts, and wish them well, wish them a peaceful onward journey, and also I think this also brings me to one very common thing that is said, and I think it needs to be debunked. A very, very common terminology used in these funeral ceremonies of departed ones, where and the social media and co, where they use the terminology "rest in peace," R.I.P., R.I.P., rest in peace. I think it's very important to also note that when we have that notion that after we pass away, it's about rest, eternal rest, then that also can be quite an impeding in terms of the progress, because there's no such rest in creation. Creation is a constant movement, constant lively activity, joyful activity. That's what it should be, so there's no such rest, and that kind of rest can mean that the person passes away and takes that strong belief that it's about rest, but finds out that is not so, or may just feel that all it is about rest, and then that could even impede their development. So there's no such rest, and the best you can wish the departed soul is just peaceful onward journey, and to continue their development and to continue their maturity. So like I said, just to go back to that question again, out of respect, as a mark of respect and consideration for the departed one, it's encouraged that people must comport themselves, especially at the funerals ceremonies. And if you cannot control your emotions, it's better to just leave that vicinity, until you're able to comport yourself, and then you come back. So I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you, Brother William. Dear listeners, you're listening to Blessradio, and I know some people might be expecting to hear from Brother Sayom at this time, 8 o'clock. After he's running a bit late, he'll be joining about 7:30 tonight. His show, the Spiritual Reality Show, will start when we finish. So we'll just wait till he comes here comes into the studio. So at the moment, this is the Spiritual Discussion Program on Blessradio. The aim of the show is to introduce you to the work In the Light of Truth, the Grail Message by Abdul Shin, which is a spiritual knowledge of life. And the topic we're discussing is death and the beyond. It's a continuation from last week. And we'd love you to join us. If you have any questions or comments, the number to contact us here in UK, it's 079 444 31366. You can call, text or use WhatsApp. The number again, 079 444 31366. And if you're contacting us from outside of UK, it is 0044 79 444 31366. There's some noise coming from the background. I'll just say put yourself on mute, please. So I'm going to go to Brother Femi now. Brother Femi, we spoke a little bit earlier before the show started, and you mentioned you were coming back from Poland, and you visited Auschwitz in Poland, where many Jews were, gassed and murdered in the World War II. And I just wanted to bring a question based on that experience that you've just been, seen. And we are talking about death here. And obviously that was a death of thousands of people, maybe millions, and happening at the same time. And I just wanted to ask, how? I mean, that's such a massive, like a genocide, of a particular race of people or particular religion, let's say, Jewish people. Is there any like a spiritual explanation? I mean, obviously it's a very evil act that was done, but is there any like a deeper spiritual explanation, of such a number of people, being killed in a group, and obviously I'm just going to ask who, everybody apart from Brother Femi, please mute yourself because I can hear some background sound. Just mute yourself apart from Brother Femi. So, Brother Femi, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Okay. So yeah, did you hear that question?
Yes, I did. I did.
If you can, please help us to understand, how come such a genocide, what could be the spiritual understanding of that?
Okay, thank you for the question. Yes, I had the opportunity to visit these camps, and one of the things which struck me very deeply is how evil humans can be in a warped sense. So from the little that I know about Hitler's philosophy, he wanted to create the perfect race. He had very little tolerance for that which was not close to perfection, and his objective was to destroy it, basically. In many respects, this is very similar to the Luciferian principle, where Lucifer, who was meant to be a helper to humanity, found us disgusting when we made mistakes. Of course, if we were as we should be, if we were indeed perfect, then there wouldn't have been an issue. But because we were not, and we needed the time to grow and develop into the perfect beings that we have the possibility to be, he did not want that. And so he chose his method of tempting us mercilessly, showing up our weaknesses, and in his full recognition of the laws of creation, knowing that those who continue to exhibit such weaknesses would be destroyed. So, being in Auschwitz, to me, brought that home in a fairly strong way. The other point which I should raise at this stage before going into my own personal picture is that life, the dimensions of life as varied as it could be can always be boiled down back to the fundamental laws that governs life, because there is a framework within which everything operates. And so any experience, any event that we experience on the personal level, or that we become aware of in the wider world, one can always try and understand what is going on within the laws of life. Now, it is important to state that my own interpretation of an experience that I go through would not be the same as yours, because my experience is guided by my level of recognition, my level of maturity, and of my awareness. And so that which I believe to be accurate today, tomorrow, due to various other events that I may go through, may become changed.
Thank you.
Ultimately, sorry, I haven't quite finished.
Yeah.
So ultimately, it is important that each person makes the effort to understand the laws of life and become more aware of how this applies to them. So there I was in this camp where literally millions of people had been killed after going through, some of them were killed immediately, some of them were used as laborers in a very painful way, and eventually passed on. And we ask ourselves, how can this be? You know, what is the if indeed there is a creator, why would he allow such to happen? You know, why would he? Why couldn't a stop be brought to this? Of course, eventually a stop was brought to it when the Allied forces were able to conquer Germany. And indeed, in these concentration camps, because there were actually quite a lot of them all over the place, there were many that were saved. And so again, the question can be asked, why was it those particular ones that were saved and not the others? One can come up with so many different answers to these questions. But the fundamental principle is the answer lies within the law. And the law talks about that which you sow, you must reap. If you understand the concept of reincarnation, it makes it easier to understand that as well. The law also talks about homogeneity. You move with those. You move. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, you move with those that have a link with you. Now, what I'm going to say here now may be somewhat controversial, but I will explain it as being my own recognition at this stage. Jesus Christ came into this world amongst the Jews. He came as the light. He came to redeem them to show them the way back to God the Father. And substantially, he was murdered by the activities of the Jews collectively as a race. And we know that even though there is mercy and there is forgiveness, life is a continuum, and that which we sow, we're bound to experience, whether we like it or not. And so, to my mind, at this juncture, it is not unreasonable for me anyway, personally, based on my experiencing, to conclude that the collective pain, the collective sorrow that the Jewish race as a whole had to experience is linked to that which they brought about knowingly or unknowingly. And when one also understands the concept of reincarnation, yes, it is possible, of course, that I may incarnate in a particular life in one race, as one race, or in one country, and at a future time in a different race, in a different country. But fundamentally, there is nothing that says I would not incarnate in the same race that I was in a previous life. And so it is not beyond the realms of understanding to actually see that some of these souls that had to go through so much torture and so much pain were actually closing a cycle that was initiated at a very specific point in time. Nothing, absolutely nothing in life happens in a vacuum. There is always a beginning that precipitates what follows through. And so, for me, it becomes more of an admonition that in choosing and in making decisions, one must take great care so that we do not unnecessarily burden ourselves in a way that we suffer great pain, both in this present life and possibly in the future life to come. I will leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Sorry, there's a question I wish to pose.
Go ahead, Brother Gregory.
At the departure of Christ, when he suffered terribly, we know it was the Romans who implemented this terrible torture, so-called. Now, at the cross, he cried and said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Using your interpretation, are you saying the Father did not forgive them? Is that what you mean?
Is Brother William still on the call?
Yes, I'm here.
If you don't mind, I would like you to take that question from Brother Greg.
Oh, okay. So can you come again, Brother Gregory?
At the departure of Christ,
yes,
he made an entreaty,
yes,
and said, "Father, forgive them, for they
Yes.
know not what they do."
yes. That's
According to Femi's interpretation, it's his opinion that many of those who had to suffer those terrible things at the Second World War, they themselves must have given rise to such suffering. My question is that when Christ, being the love incarnate himself, made that entreaty,
Yes.
According to his explanation, does it mean the Father did not forgive them?
Okay. That's thank you for that question. Now, one of the things that we have to be clear about, is that Christ, for instance, was the love of the Almighty incarnate. Okay. But one of the things that Christ was even very clear about when he came, he said, I come not to overthrow the laws of my Father, but to fulfill them. And even though Christ is the love of the Almighty and was love of the Almighty incarnate, he did not displace the justice of the Almighty. You see, so that, and in the divine, high up, justice and love cannot be separated. They're one, So, that is how we want to look at it in terms of the concept of justice. But I think it's very, very important for us when we go into Christ and what happened and leading up to the crucifixion. I think it's very, very important for us to not to isolate the problem to just one human race. I think it's important for us to know that what happened to Christ is as a result of a collective failure of humanity as a whole. So we are jointly responsible. We're all responsible regardless of wherever the human spirit might have been incarnated. Well, it's a collective responsibility of humanity, because if humanity, if we were where we had to or needed to be, then Christ would not have had to incarnate in the first place or subject himself to the rigors of what an earth life and the whole process entails. Now, it's very, very important for us to understand, where the problem came from. Where did this problem come from? Where did we go wrong? You see, where did we go wrong as a race? Because when we're trying to try to understand something and to solve a problem, it's very important for us to identify the root cause of the problem, and then gradually we can start to work our way towards finding a solution. Where did we go wrong as a species? Humanity went wrong, when we started to over-cultivate the intellect. So the intellect is a tool that we use here on the earth, and it is produced by the brain that we have, the frontal brain, the intellect. Now, humanity, millions of years ago, when things were still the way they should be on earth, the spirit, the core, and the voice of the spirit, the inner voice or the intuition, humanity, we still listened to this intuition. And this intuition, the voice of the spirit itself, still had that connection, with the higher realms. And so we still had that guidance. And so humanity was living according to the sense and the will of the Almighty. The earth was a beautiful place at that period. Now, what now happened? Through over-cultivating the intellect, we now started to choke off the spirit and the inner voice. So we started to ignore the inner urgence of the intuitive perception or the inner voice. We started to ignore it. And over time, we were ignoring it until, the spirit just became indolent. It became inactive. It lost its alertness. And so the intellect, now usurped the throne where the spirit should be, controlling, the physical body and the intellect. The intellect now takes over control of this, and is now and chokes off the spirit. And so we cut ourselves off from that higher guidance, and by default, cut ourselves off from the Creator, And what were the manifestations of cutting ourselves or choking off the spirit? We started to cultivate all the things that are associated with intellect. avarice, greed, covetousness, the penchant for stealing, lying, sensuality, all the things that are chained to matter, So we continue to do that. And also, part of this intellectual egoism, us against them, feeling superior to the other person, so all these problems, all these manifestations, then we now started to, because again we had lost this guidance of the Spirit, and yet the Spirit was there, we now started to live in fear, we started to live in fear because we had lost that connection. And so what now happens is that gradually people started to arise that, all the different belief systems, some of the cults, and idolatrous practices, started to arise because we had, lost that connection, and then, that's when all these wars started, and that's when you can now imagine.
I'm not cutting you short. I'm trying to focus on that which is most essential. For in Brother Femi's quoting about the returns, there was an additional question which I thought I should pose.
Okay.
Because it serves to clarify many things. Now, through our conceptions, it is very clear that the living love came to support, and yet we now have the situation where he was nailed to the cross. He hadn't done anything against anyone, yet he was nailed to the cross. What, in following the reasoning that we have put forth, although personal, would he have done to have merited that?
Yes. So basically, nothing. He did not deserve that. I was trying to get to the root cause of the problem, of the fact that due to the had lost that connection with the light, it was self-serving, it was a dastardly crime, and because we had that free will, because that's something about the human spirit, as we have the freedom of choice, of decision making, but when we decide, when we make the choice, we are bound by the consequences of our actions, and so the fact that we made a decision like that to murder someone who had not done anything at all, who in fact brought love and brought that message for us, for our progress, for our development, and yet we subjected him to the most gruesome torture. He asked for forgiveness, to forgive them, for they know not what they do. First of all, if you think about it, you don't forgive something if the thing is not wrong. We clearly wronged him, but out of love he asked for that forgiveness. But that does not take away us accounting for the consequences of our actions, which was a crime. And that's why I used the term that even though his love, he did not displace justice, and so justice had to be served, and so we had to pay for the consequences of our actions, and we are still paying for the consequences of that crime that we committed against the Son of God, even up till today.
May I come in there? I just had a little thought about it. Those people who wanted Jesus to be murdered or to be killed or to be put out of the way, if Jesus did not say that prayer, maybe a prayer of intercession to forgive them, maybe the laws of life would have made sure when the judgment happens, they would have definitely, let's say, gone in. I'm going to use the word in quotes, in hell. They would have suffered their spiritual death had Jesus not. This has just come to me now. It's not something I thought about before. And if he had not, so basically, by Jesus saying forgive them, he's not saying cancel what the crime they have done, but to give them a chance to redeem it. Because it could have been, because at the end of the day, it was a murder of a light being, somebody, the Son of God, and that is a very serious crime. And the punishment for that, you can imagine, is not going to be very easy. for any human being to handle. And as I say, it could result in basically your own death of your own spirit. And this is my own thinking, just top of my head right now. It came into me. Had he not said that prayer of intercession or forgive them, that once he says that prayer, it allows that spirit who's committed the crime to ask for Jesus' death or to be involved in Jesus' death, to give them a second chance to come back, especially since we know there's something called reincarnation, and this would have been them a chance to redeem, or to find to find the truth again, let's say. So
yes,
yeah,
the idea of this question put forward is to enable us to reflect a bit deeper into the laws through which everything has come into being. That it may not be that people have to suffer because they themselves have done something which is not right. Because Christ had to suffer, he did not do anything wrong, yet he had to suffer. So there are scenarios that way that needs to be considered very carefully, such that in one's reflection, one will come to the inner clarity, so as not to associate that every suffering that one finds out there is due to something one had done wrong. There are many times you don't need to do anything wrong before humanity hates you, because in fact when you are doing something right, they don't like it, so they will hate you for that, which is what happened to the case of Christ. So you find all this queer behavior among human spirits. Well, these are topics which can be discussed in another time.
Yes.
Thank you.
We're going to carry on. Brother Sam still not here yet. So, dear listeners, those who are waiting for Brother Sayom in his program on the Spiritual Reality Show, we are still waiting for him. When he does come, we will hand over to him. So we're going to carry on with the show Spiritual Discussion Program, which is the aim. The aim is always to introduce you to the Grail message in the light of truth. And the topic we are discussing tonight is death and the beyond. Brother Gregory, I've got a question for you now. It's slightly different from what we've just been talking about, but it's again about the people on the earth. People wanting to contact the dead, for example. So, for example, using a medium or a psychic. And so, is it good for people on the earth who have lost their loved one to connect with the people who have passed on, their relatives who have passed on, or friends who have passed on, using, let's say, a medium or something like that? Is that a good idea? That's to Brother Gregory.
Question is it a good idea to try to connect to those who have departed this earth life? The simple answer is no. It's a very bad idea, and it's a bad volition. A person who has incarnated on earth has tasks he or she has to fulfill here on the earth. When a person then leaves the physical plane and goes to another plane, there are other tasks that needs to be fulfilled. To carry over when one is here on earth, and instead of focusing on the challenges and become independent, to now start bothering that person who has moved over to come to one's rescue and provide answers to petty human thinking is not helpful. It only means you want to attract that particular personality to come and advise you, whereas you, who has the physical body and also has a soul, sit on an armchair waiting to be advised on what to do, when that particular personality hasn't got as much features, has not got the use of the physical body and the conceptions which abound in physical reality here on earth. That personality has lost it. He can't understand why some things have been done. Therefore, it is not advisable on any occasion to start invoking those who have departed the physical plane or have shared their physical body to come back or to try to connect to them through a medium and be asking them questions, the answers which they themselves do not know. For one who is very advanced would have left not only the physical plane here, we also have passed through the ethereal to move much further. So when through a medium you're trying to reach that particular person, you subject the medium to all sorts of difficulties. And it's only selfishness and indolence that makes it possible for you to ignore the task which one has to deal with here on earth and need to ask some other person to come have a look at it and do your own homework for you. So it's a very bad idea. It should not be attempted.
Thank you, Brother Gregory. And I was thinking, let's say, I know some, that question about contacting the dead, it could be for some casual purposes, but some people, they said they have lost somebody, their brother or a child, you know, it's like a, not through a natural death, let's say, through an accident or through sort of premature death, let's call it a premature death. And then they just want to know why, you know, why this person has gone out of their life, you know, somebody they were close with, and so on. And so they might be going to a psychic or a medium to answer this question. And then so the question, in a way, I almost want to ask, then even the psychic and a medium then is like doing a wrong thing, you know, because but that psychic has an ability to be in touch with the beyond. Some of them is quite natural ability. So I'm just wondering, what is the purpose of the psychic or medium? If he's, you know, what should he, if he's not going to do that, because if it's wrong for him to contact the people in the beyond.
Genuine psychics will always pass information to mankind that they need, not what many go and ask them for. For most of the time, the questions asked to this psychic are petty. Where is the cash? Why did I lose this child? I want to know. Actually, one should never forget what attracted that particular human spirit to the parents. There must be some strong homogeneity. That child was a gift. And once the child, in quotes, has fulfilled that which it needs to fulfill, maybe to awaken in the parents something a bit higher, the child goes back. It now depends on the parents how they wish to reflect on it. Therefore, parents should know the responsibilities they bear. And when a loved one has passed on, of course, there's grieving. However, one should not forget that the Lord giveth, they accept it. When through the laws of nature or the laws of creation, the Lord takes back, they should also accept it. I know many wish to find out why has the Lord, through the laws of creation, taken what he has given to us. That is a different discussion altogether. But even if the psychics are there, their task is of a different nature. For many become too dependent that when they have a cold, they will now have to ask the psychic why they have a cold. And when they have a toothache, they want to find out what they have done in the beyond why they have a toothache. So man should strive to rely on himself and develop itself in a spiritual sense, rather than always running to a psychic to find out why has this happened and why has that happened, because the psychic is supposed to make contact. Some of the psychics, they only see at a very low level. If the child is matured enough, and has come only to help the parents, and having fulfilled that, departs to where it came from at a very high level, the psychic is unable to reach that. And too many questions will force the psychic to start lying, all right, giving all sort of information which is contrary to the laws of creation.
Thank you, Brother Gregory.
Yeah. Can I just say something here?
Yes,
if it's,
please.
Just a little bit, and it's not. I'm not going on a divergent view, but I would just say that I would not want to throw away the baby with the bathwater. You know, in saying that, you know, there are people who have these abilities and talents, clairvoyance, clairaudience, and so forth. And sometimes, you know, there are people who are in distress. You know, they don't have that knowledge, but they're in distress. They've not been able to. They've had very, very severe experiences. You know, and where the people have just passed away all of a sudden, just like that. And maybe sometimes they had some ties that you know, they weren't able to express their love, or they have some serious grudge. You know, and so the person now passes away, and then the person here on earth, you know, is really, really in turmoil, you know, and in despair. And for some people, you know, you find that just that contact, you know, from that loved or departed one, just reassuring them that, look, you know, I forgive you for whatever you've done to me. It's okay. You know, everything is fine. You know, just some reassurance, you know, that I'm fine, you know, has in itself, you know, helped the healing process for some of these people. And they've gone on to, you know, really transform their lives, you know, and were able to move on, you know, in terms of their experiencing. And then, like you said, our lives on earth, we are here to experience. We're here to mature. We're here to develop. Where the problem is when we now start to become reliant or dependent on these messages. That's where it becomes quite problematic. But there are cases where, you know, revelations from them, useful information has been able to come about. And we mustn't forget, you know, that even a lot of us, you know, millennia or eons of years ago, a lot of us still had this contact with the beyond, you know. So yeah, I wouldn't go as far as saying that it is bad or it's this, but I would just say that yes, you know, if it's used properly, there can be some use, but you know, most times we abuse it and we become too dependent on these mediums and all these things that we now divert, or we don't experience, you know, our earth lives and start relying on these people, and that doesn't help, and we're just basically wasting our time because we're not really truly experiencing and living in the present and learning what life really should tell us. So that's all I would just add to that, you know. But yeah, we're still on the same page.
Thank you.
Thank you.
May I just add a very little to it?
Yes.
Should one who is distrust have that need to know and in itself and ask for help from the light, real help, that the solution will be provided in one form or the other. Many through simple experiences, some through their sleep. So there are varied methods which some of these solutions to many a problem come. However, if one now ignores all these varied methods and decides that I must go to a psychic, all right, the maturity of the psychic, which you don't know, you assume all of them are genuine. You now go to a quack one, which is very much the case. What do you expect to get? As long as the innate desire to seek is there, and one don't ask, it has been said, ask and it shall be given unto you. When the human spirit matures to that extent and is convinced that indeed that the word or the expression ask, then it will not be in doubt as to how that answer will come. It will not need to go asking people, say, okay, can you call this soul back? For such deep vibrations within the human spirit, we will send messages to the particular one they are reflecting on. And in reciprocal activity, help will be granted. That is the way creation is.
Thank you, Brother Gregory. I'm going to Brother Reiner now. Brother Reiner, you know I'm going to give an example of this one now. So there's, let's say, in Islam, there's some belief where if you fight for a good cause and you die, which is, people call it jihad, but I'm just going to call it this way, that you are like a martyr and you go into heaven, and based on this belief. So, and you've been talking earlier, Brother Reiner, that we create our own fate in the beyond. When we die, the type of world that we enter is according to what we have been, thoughts they have been generating, and how we've been acting. That's the world we are forming in the beyond. I mean, we talked about thought forms already. We call them demons and phantoms. That we always, every time we think or just act, just whatever we say, whatever comes out of us in a thought, ideas, it makes a form. So what I want to ask Brother Reiner is this belief, because that's what it is, that somebody who dies for a good cause, let's say cause for God, that's what they believe. It could be fighting in war, it could be something else. I don't want to make it too direct on that, specific on that. And then they would automatically end up in paradise as a martyr, if they died in whatever cause that was. So, Brother Reiner, is that really true? That's to Brother Reiner. Can you hear me?
Sorry, I was on mute.
Okay.
Okay, let me answer that. This is, of course, when we look at the religion, and there's this concept of the martyr who, to further Islam or that religion, or searches death, looks for death in order to further good cause, let us say the spreading of Islam. And let's be quite clear, that was Abu Bakr, who at the time, who introduced that into the Islam. And that concept of the warrior dying in the field, and as a recompense, he would pass by the Last Judgment and would get his recompense being straight in paradise, we know that with all the virgins around him and things. Now, this concept is, of course, unbelievably disastrous in its consequences, and it's quite good just to pin it down onto this saying, the concept of martyr, of dying in the field and being then recompensed in that way, which of course is then, in the last analysis, is the root of all the actions we see today. Now, we talked about suicide. First of all, and we talked about the mother going, for some reason, going into death with her child. Let us make someone a suicide bomber. For some reason, he thinks, I have to go to this mosque. I'm a Sunni Muslim. I have to go to this Shiite mosque And I know when there's a festivity, I mingle among the people, I blow myself up and kill so many other people. In a way, that's a kind of suicide. We even call them suicide bombers. So we have been talking about suicide, what happens. Then he has grossly affected many other people, perhaps 40 or 50 other people, sometimes 3,000 people. He's inflicted, he's pulled into death with himself. From that, what we said today, we can immediately see what will happen. It will be a very rude awakening for him, that he will be immediately in this loop we talked about, and he will blow himself up again and again, do the preparation, run into the crowd, mingle, blow himself up, go through that whole pain, and he will also be surrounded by all the other people, and it will be repeated and repeated and repeated. And it must be very similar to what is at one point. Probably he learns, it might demon him that it's wrong, and he might develop some compassion for the other people he pulled into his death. He actually went out to kill, and killing in itself is wrong. There's the law, you shall not kill, that includes physical killing. So already there he violates the law. He already says God is imperfect through that act, because he makes this law, you shall not kill. On the other hand, my religion says I can kill to go directly into heaven. So it's already blasphemous in that way, that he supposes God to be contradictory, that he says in one way you can kill to become directly into heaven. Those laws given by the light, they are without contradiction, and if you find a contradiction, you have to resolve it and throw away that which is wrong. And in that case, obviously it is wrong to think as a martyr you go straight into heaven and are recompensed with your, I don't know, 51 or 73 virgins. And he should very seriously think of it. So what do I think? I think it is wrong. From what we said, the consequences will be more than dire, will be unbelievably dire for those persons involved. And of course, the other persons then, which also he must then, before he can go onto the ascent towards the light, and he must free himself from all those people he has injured in some way, and he has ripped out of life here on earth, or injured that their noses, their half the faces are blown away, and they are the rest of their life limping around half dead. He must then make good all those things before he can think of his own ascent. If there are so many people, that will be a hard task. And of course, doing that, he will create thought forms. This heinous act will create thought forms and demons, and which he has to create. I try to mention that today. We will create those things. We have no choice not to create them. He will create those demons which will beset and drive people to similar deeds, and will entice them so that people where such things happen, they become enveloped by demonic forms which have a life of their own, which drive people to similar acts. And already this is a kind of punishment for the people who let such false ideas spread. But okay, in the initial thing it was just a false idea, and the Abu Bakr, when he introduced that phrase, thought it's always very clever. I get my soldiers to fight without fear of death. And the clever idea is of course disastrous in this result, in its results, and most of all the Islamic people now have to suffer from that, even more than the infidels. And this is, of course, also because of the laws of creation, that is reciprocal action. What you do to others, you will sow, and there's no way around it. And so what they have done to others, they reap more themselves than the infidels. I think I leave it with that because it's a very dire topic, but yes. It's a disastrous mistake. I think talking about it to have uttered or to have put that phrase into the Quran or written down and spread that among the soldiers in the Islamic world. The same thing is with Hitler. I mean, this terrible killing of the Jews, those killing machines he has built, and altogether 6 million. He started a long time before the Second World War. It was not only during the Second World War. I mean, the fundamental flaw is just one single thing. He thought there is the races are above one another, and there's a leading race, the Aryan race, which is better. If you have this concept, of course, then you come to, okay, they are the inferior races. And then you come naturally to the conclusion, well, if they are inferior, why not eliminate them? Why get hampered with those things? And you come to that conclusion, and then the Jewish race is the most inferior of all, which is of course wrong. And you start thinking, oh, I annihilate, I buy those. I create a machinery which just kills them off. But in the end, it is the consequences of just one wrong idea or one wrong concept. And I think those wrong concepts, we really must identify them and recognize them as such, to not suffer from the consequences of those ideas. Okay, I hand it back to you, Sard. It's now 10 o'clock.
Yes.
Or 9 o'clock here.
Yes, that's fine. Brother Sayom is almost here. So we're going to finish at 9 p.m., just a few minutes. Just wanted to say something from what Brother Ryan has just been saying. Unfortunately, what we have today with this jihad and whatever, well, so-called jihad, it has to be said, because it's not the true anymore, what was meant by the original concept of jihad. So basically, what Abu Bakr said, suicide is not allowed in Islam actually, so it's against Islam. So when they're saying they're doing suicide mission, it's already against Islam. So they've already distorted that from the beginning. So those who commit suicide. So the word martyr, it doesn't have anything to connect it with suicide, but it's meant to be a falling in battle, fighting for the good cause or for your struggle. So, but you made the point. Definitely, you create your world. Everything you do, you're forming something from it. So obviously, if it's wrong ideas, wrong conceptions, those things are going to happen. That fate, you've already said it. The Muslims are killing each other already, so it's already happening to themselves. So they're getting the consequence of that. So yeah, we basically come to the end of the show, listeners. Thank you for being with us tonight. A bit of an extension provided by our next presenter, just arriving any moment. So I'd just like to ask my colleagues. No, before I say that, I just say the next week's show, the topic will be the end times. So that's the end times. That's what we'll be discussing next week. If you have any questions, please do join us, or any comments, please do join us next week. So I'm going to ask my colleagues to say goodbye, starting with Brother Femi, please. Anything you'd like to say to the listeners?
I think he's on mute.
Oh, he's on mute. Brother Femi, okay. Brother Femi, are you there? He still looks like he's still on mute. Let me ask Brother Reiner to say goodbye first then. Brother Reiner, please.
Okay.
Yeah.
A simple goodbye from me.
Okay.
It has been a long program tonight,
Yes.
but I survived.
You survived. Well done. Thank you.
And I'm looking forward to see you next week. Goodbye and have a good week.
Thank you so much. And Brother Reiner. Brother Gregory, would you like to say goodbye?
Yeah, he's had to leave.
He's got to leave. Okay, Brother William, please, if you can say your good wishes to the listeners.
Yes, thank you very much for your time and attention this evening, and I hope that you all have benefited from listening and tuning into the program. And like we always try to say, that we cannot, even if we continue to talk for the next few hours, we cannot do justice to a lot of the things that we human beings need to know, and that's what the essence of this show is, just to bring or create that awareness about this wonderful work, the Grail message, which we encourage everybody to examine, because it just says so much and clarifies all these things that we were talking about. But the last thing I would just want to wrap up by saying, or encouraging people, in light or in view of the topic that we are discussing today, death and the beyond, is for us to start to think about that concept of death. Because when we start to think about death, what that also does is we now start to realize that we are more like co-creators here in the universe. And so we are constantly forming, and when you think about it in that way, you are constantly forming the consequences that await you when you pass away. So when you start to think about that, then you will realize that it's very important for you to cultivate purity, to live aright, to continue to strive, to sow good seeds, purify your thoughts, your intuition, and your deeds. So very, very important, because there are consequences behind all our actions which await us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that, Brother William. Really good advice for everybody there. Brother Femi, are you back now? Are you off mute? I think he's still on mute, Brother Femi. So I'm going to say goodbye on behalf of Brother Femi.
Sorry about that. Yes.
Go on.
I am here. And wishing everyone a wonderful week ahead until next Tuesday. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. And this is Brother Sard signing off. Thank you very much for listening to us, a very long program tonight. Brother Sayom is in the house, I'm glad to say. He's going to be on at any moment, very soon. Do you want to say anything, Brother Sayom, just to say hello before you start?
Okay, greeting listeners. Greeting listeners, how you doing? Yes, I have just arrived. I mean, what held me up is interesting because of what is being talked today. It's, I think I mentioned last Tuesday that I had a friend whose father passed away, and then there was a sister friend later on who's let me know that her mother passed away. So, the last comment that I'm not sure who it was, if it was Femi or someone else, Brother William, when he mentioned about death, and it's something that I think we need to kind of look into to comprehend, so we can, the experience of it is something we all have to face. And I think this is the reason why we need to gain into, I would say, the true perception of reality, because we're living in an illusion. What we are holding on to make out is a reality. It's transitory. Okay, it's like when we deal with death, it's actually dealing with the psychology, the belief about the end, holding on, not wanting to let go. A lot of things through my experience seeing a lot of death, which I would prefer not to even use the word, because there's no such thing. Okay, So we keep a program running when we use words that don't even mean what we're believing in it to be. You see what I mean? So I would just share, because I mean my show's coming up now, so I suppose I will just reiterate some of what I'm saying now as I go into my show, because the similarity between our show is that we're talking about spirituality. I call it spirit truality based on the phonetics, because spirit is the true reality of whom and what we is. And therefore, to get to know thyself, which means we need to get to know thyself. And the idea of death and the fear of it, what's beyond the horizon, will not be such a fearfully ego-packed of erroneous ideas that we unfortunately, we carry around within us. Many people don't want to die, but they're afraid to live at the same time. So what's going on? So my way of approaching things is I'll be more kind of, I suppose, more direct into it and all of that. But it's a good topic, and it is something that one and all, each and every one and all, has to face. So there's a term in the wisdom text where it's about dying before you die, learning to die before you die, because really it's the count of itself that you want to die, you know what I mean? Because it's interfering with our ability to perceive reality, the true nature of reality. And therefore, based on that, we walk around in ignorance with erroneous ideas that we try to make true, to make real. And whatever you hold in your consciousness is what you're going to give energy to and create. So knowing thyself is the way to liberate ourselves from our own misery, self-perpetuated misery, based upon ignorance of knowing the truth of thyself. So that's what I would say. Don't want to take up the show because I got to do mine. So,
thank you, Brother
You're welcome.
So yes, he'll be on in a few moments. So thank you, listeners, for being with me and my colleagues tonight. We're back next Tuesday, 6 p.m. till 8. Spiritual discussion program introducing the Grail message, and the topic will be the end times. Thank you very much. Have a great week.
Blessfm, no cigarette smoking in my room. I still want Marley. Blessfm radio, play good tune.